Today I just want to talk to you regarding a few things which I'm not a minister, I'm not preaching because there's too much weight I bear. I'm just sharing. Because it says don't seek teaching if there's too much responsibility. We all get something out of this. But for me, I've been thinking about this for a little while and listening to a number of ministers, Martin Lloyd-Jones and Piper, and also my new Bible I've got is Systematic Theology. But it's the ESV, English Standard Version Bible. So there's a few commentaries in there and I've been reading those. And so it spurred me on to do the talk I'm doing today, come what may. And I just want to start off, last time when I spoke, it was probably about 2-3 months ago now, I mentioned about a little woman who impressed me so much. Miss Lovibon was her name. And when I was I'd only just become a Christian, I was about 22, 23. And when I used to drive past her house in the hills, even in the middle of the night, like AM in the morning, 2 AM, I don't know what time she slept, but the light was on. And I shouldn't have done this, but I went over with one of my friends one time and we peeked in and she was praying in her chair, a real comfortable chair. She would always be praying. And I got to know Miss Lovibon until she died, about 10 years, or 15 years ago now. And she was 96 when she died and my daughters met her. But what I wanted to say, and it fits into this, is that if you had given her, and I really mean this, if you had given her $1 billion, she would not have given you her Bible. If you had given her $1 billion, she would not have given you a Bible. And in that is because, and I'll come back to her in a moment, but there was something in Miss Lovibon which I knew, and I really loved her prayers, and I have seen it in other people, but for her it sort of grabbed my attention of the character who she was. And she would always be on the streets giving out Christian flyers for people, and that's where Robin met her in the city and things like that. And even on the bus, if you were sitting next to her, she would say, one of the first things she would say, "Do you know Jesus, dear?" Because she was older than nearly everybody she met. But she would get away with it. And friends of mine who would go into the hotel and drink as young guys, as I mentioned, sometimes saw her out the front and she would say, "Don't go in there, Johnny, don't go in there, Billy, don't go in there, in to have a drink." And anyway, they wouldn't. And they would actually go around the back and go in to the hotel. And they said to me one time when they were telling me this, and and I said, that's, what would she have done? And anyway, they said to me, the reason why they couldn't go into the front of the hotel is because it was like there was tears in her eyes and she was pleading with them, "Don't go in." And but they went in because they said to me, "What do you say to someone like that? How can you say, and defy her and sort of go in?" But they did go in the back door. And sadly, those guys who I don't know, but unless they've come back to know Christ, if it's possible to fall away, all fell away, which is sad. Maybe they should have heeded a bit of advice. But I'll sort of come back to sort of Miss Lovibon and the way she saw God, and in a moment. So I'll put that on hold. But before I start, I just want to commit this time to the Lord. Our Heavenly Father, I pray that your word would be heard today and it'd be taken in, and not me, not the person who's speaking, because only your word is important here. And so any other things that I'll say which is not of you, let it be discarded. And I pray that your Spirit will be here just to give me clarity, to share in simple ways of what you have us to know, the magnificent truths that you have for us. Let us only hear this. In Jesus' name I pray. It is true, and I've said this before, that we don't need to know a great many things, but what we do need to know is a few great things. Yes. And this is one of the great things for myself. As I was saying, I've been dwelling on, and I've been a Christian for over 30 years, 35 years now. I've sort of taken to reading a bit of William Wilberforce, and as you might know, he was responsible for helping end the slave trade in England, and he impressed upon many people to see people as all had the dignity of God, and everybody was equal. But what he said, unless you understand some of the gigantic truths of the Bible, you would never know what God is like. And I believe this is one of them. And this is one which is really, and if I can say this as an intro, and I said to Robin last night I wouldn't say about this, but something in our church, particularly in Western society, I can say has lost the understanding of this in the last 200 years. And I noticed John Piper, who's a pastor in America, has been reading much of William Wilberforce, people of the Puritan period, which is in the 1500s. And this is one of the things which I want to discuss today, and that's to speak of something, and it's not just theoretic, and it's not just remote to us, but the essence of evil. Sometimes when we hear these things, they sound really abstract, and you say, what's this? Where does this evil come from within us? And this should affect all of us. This is not theoretical. This is the evil in myself and in you, in the world, and in the world we look at. What is the spring? What is the root where that comes from, that evil? Now, I live in the hills, and Peter would know that, and some of us would know this, that sometimes you can have a spring of water, and it can be a fair way away. It can be a little trickle, it can be a couple of little trickles, and way down here is like a lake, a big pond. And sometimes there's a spring underneath the pond, but sometimes we don't know where that fountain's coming from. But it's it's going in like a little creek into the little lake that you've got. And sometimes for us, we forget that. This is my teacher instinct, is it? They're going like this. That sometimes that the root, we see the fruit sometimes of our lives, we see the fruit. And sometimes we don't really see the roots of why we're doing certain things, of why the people in the world are doing what they're doing. And whether they're political leaders, whether it's individuals and things like that, and even ourselves. We wonder, where does this come from? When you see somebody else doing something wrong, you might think, oh, where does that come from? But what I'm going to tell you today is really the answer to that. I believe that God really makes it very clear in His Word, where does this sort of come from? And so evil in the world is very pervasive, but when we know where it comes from, and we can understand it, we can we can do something about it. And as I say there, is that we have to distinguish between the fruit and the root. Sometimes we might fix the fruit up, and yet we've got a really massive root problem. And so nothing changes. And I just want to go to and the scripture's very good at this, and here's two scriptures. I just want to look at two scriptures today, and one is in Jeremiah 2:10 to 13. So Jeremiah chapter 2, 10 to 13. And I'm reading out like the ESV, all right, so it might be a little bit different translations than yours. But when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is a really amazing stuff. And so two passages I'm going to read, and Jeremiah is one of them. And we're going to see what the prophet is shocked at. And why should the universe be appalled? So let's read. Cross to the coast of Cyprus and see, and send to Kedar and examine with care. See if there has been such a thing. Has a nation changed its gods, even though they are no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. Be appalled, O heavens, at this. Be shocked. Be utterly desolate, declares the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. And listen to this. Two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have hewed out cisterns, which is like water tanks, for themselves broken cisterns that can hold no water. So God is saying that the entire universe, the heavens and the galaxies, should be shocked at what's happening here. Should be shocked. Should be in a state of shock. The galaxies and that, these are inanimate objects. These are something which can't speak. But they're in shock. Why? Because my people, this is what God is saying, my people, which is Israel, my people have changed their glory. Now listen to that. Their glory for that which does not profit. That is, my people have exchanged, this is what God is saying, the wonder of my glory, for worthlessness. And it's a bit like having, a mansion in the Alps. Imagine the Swiss Alps. We all probably go to Switzerland sometime and have a beautiful house mansion in the Swiss Alps for a shack in the garbage dump. That's the image, really, what we're getting, is that Israel is exchanging God's glory for something so worthless. And if we look in verse 13, we see that shock is broken into two pieces. Two pieces. And if you look at 13, it says, my people have committed two evils, for they have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and they have hewed out cisterns. So a cistern, if you can imagine, when I went to Israel, the only place I've ever gone, they have cisterns and they carve them out of solid rock. Sometimes they can do that, or they can build it like a well where they have rocks and mortar and they make like a well. So these cisterns are meant to hold water. But it says here they have hewed out, so either carved out or made for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. So the glory, what we see here is that the glory of God in verse 11 is, if we look in verse 11, it's called in verse 13. So I should say it again. So the glory that was traded away in verse 11 is called in verse 13. What is being traded away? God is saying, me, the fountain of living waters. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters. So the first great universal shaking, if you want to call it that, the shaking of this evil coming in, is that evil has lost its taste, or their taste, for God. They don't want him. They don't want God. They don't want him. The second evil is in verse 13, because it goes into 2. They have hewed out, they've carved out cisterns for themselves, so these tanks to hold water, but they are broken cisterns that can hold no water. So not only have they turned away from the fountain of God, but the cisterns that they're making can't hold water. They can't hold anything. They're broken. So no fountain, they've forsaken God, and no cistern. They're going to die. So what we see here, this is talking to Israel, but we can apply it to ourselves in our own society, is that, so they're, if you want to call it like this, to hold things in their money cistern, the sex system, what they think sex is about, the family system, the things which are held, are things of life, the things, the beauty and the muscular, the beauty of women and the muscular of young men, and it's like a system that makes up the culture, the intellectual, the academic system, the success system, they're all broken. The political system is broken. None of it can hold any water that sustains life. Nothing of joy. It may seem that way, it may seem that it gives something, but it's that polluted water. It's stagnant and it will dry out and there'll be nothing. So what we see here, so the question is, what is the essence of evil that Jeremiah is getting at? I would say it like this, that the essence of evil, the beginning of evil, the root of evil, the core of evil, if you want to call it that, is to lose your taste for God. Or said another way, to prefer other things than God. And again, we're not only talking about Israel here, we're talking about all societies, whether Western societies or any society, it doesn't matter. So where does this evil come from? That it's broken. And what we sometimes see, we see the fruits of it in society. And I don't have to go through all the fruits. We know it. If you go to Africa, you receive the fruits of a broken society. In Australia, we can see the fruits of the broken society. We know it even in ourselves. But these fruits aren't as I was suggesting, that's not the essence of evil. The essence of evil is that we don't get any pleasure from God. Or maybe we never have got any pleasure from God. And we want other things to drink. And we say to God, thank you very much. I don't want what you've got. I want something else. I want a cistern of my own that I want to put into it. I want a cistern that holds what I want it to hold. Now, you might be saying, oh, well, perhaps that's true or not. I don't know. Maybe there's other things to it. But I want to have a look at the second passage, and that's, let's test this definition with one of the obvious definition to try to find is the Garden of Eden. What happened in the Garden of Eden? What was the deepest root? What was the problem in the garden? Where did the evil come from in the garden? Where did all the problems that we face, that the Bible tells us? So if we go to Genesis 3, 1 to 6, but this time when we read it, we will listen to try to find out, okay, what's this, where does this essence of evil come from? So in Genesis 3, 1 to 6, so we're going back to the very beginning here. And this is telling us something that happened in history. So Genesis 3, 1 to 6. And this is how it goes. When we understand this, we'll start understanding something of this essence of evil, what we're talking about. So Satan said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of the tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So, now watch this. So, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who, when we look at it, we know he was complicit in this, and he was with her. And he ate. I used to think that was just a woman, and then she gives that. But in the thinking here, you can start to see something deeper. It is not just eating that fruit. No, it's not just eating the fruit, is it? Because we're told in the scriptures, we're told, and this is what Paul says in Romans, he just says, this is, you don't have to go to it, but in Romans 5:12, he says, sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin. And so death spread to all men. And so when we think about it, to billions and billions of people over the thousands of years, sin has spread. And it says too, because all sinned. We can't escape that. And that is the place where we're at. The magnitude of this evil is that every human being is infected. Every one of us is infected by the first sin. You and I and everyone else who lives came into the world totally captive to this evil. And as I was saying, so what is the essence of this evil? And when we look at the passage here of that last bit where I read, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Listen to the three things there that she was noticing. That it was delicious and nourishing for food, that it's beautiful, it was a delight for my eyes, and it was really desirable. So for her and for Adam, the fruit was delicious, delightful, desirable. Delicious, delightful, desirable. But denied. And they ate. And they ate it. And what did that mean? It meant that we will not be denied what we desire more than God.
Yes.
This is the heart of every one of us.
Yes.
We will not be denied what we desire more than God. What was the essence of the human? That is the essence of evil in the beginning of the human race with Adam and Eve, but it is also with us. It is really that we will not be denied what we desire more than God. So that it's not about eating the forbidden fruit. And I was always, in my Christian life, it was always regarding, oh, this is a story about rebellion. And true, there is rebellion there, but the rebellion goes deeper than that, doesn't it? They had made up their mind, before they ate, they had made up their mind that God wasn't satisfying, that God was even lying to them, that he couldn't be trusted. And when we look about this, when we think about it, that this all-supplying life and joy that God was giving us, we preferred something else. And we do now in this life. There's many things that God gives us, but we will always be looking for something else. And I don't have to go into those things because we can search our own hearts. And that is the ultimate essence of evil, if we wanted to call it that. The root, the spring of evil. And if we let this sink in, it is really profound. You know, and like I said, someone's going to ask and people will argue, oh, but this is simply rebellion against God's authority. Isn't it just disobedience? And the disobedience is a real issue here. That's the essence of evil. But what we see here is no, that's not the essence of evil. The reason why I'm stressing this is because when we see that, it's not about keeping a commandment.
Yes.
It's not about the commandments. The commandments are there, but it's not about the commandments. It's about whether we, well, in a way, in one sense, I should say this. If we understand this, we will start to know why we do what we do, and we start to understand how we act and why we act the way we do. You see, this affects the way we perceive this, that if we try to keep the commandments, we can be a morally good person. There's lots of morally good people around, and even the devil doesn't mind a morally good person. Why doesn't he mind a morally good person? Because they're going to go to hell anyway, because they don't know God. They haven't given themselves, they haven't surrendered to God. And so when we look through the scriptures, what you will see again and again, particularly in the Old Testament, but also so much in the New Testament, and the psalmist has it so right, He says, delight yourself in the Lord. See, when you delight yourself in the Lord, you don't do those things wrong. We will do those things wrong. We will break those commandments. But if we're saying to ourselves, I want my relationship with God, I want to love Him, I want Him to be my joy, I want Him to be my sustaining, that supply me with what I need in my life. So no, disobedience, or law breaking if you want to call it, is not the ultimate essence of evil. That's commandment breaking. And Adam and Eve, although when sin came into the world, it wasn't just they broke the commandment of don't eat from that tree. The essence, when we look at it, the essence was that the disobedience, it came, as I was saying before, it came before them. It became because they lost their taste for God. We don't know how long they were with God, but they lost their taste for God as the all-supplying and the life and joy for their life. They preferred a created pleasure above God as their supreme pleasure. That was the essence of evil. And to go back and to look at this again, to go back to Jeremiah, what we see here is that the essence of evil there was a failure to find God as that fountain of living water. They weren't going to be satisfied with Him, with God, as they're supremely satisfied, from Him, that living water from Him. And to go back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had lost their taste for God as an all-supplying life and joy. And they had a preference, as I said a moment ago, for the created pleasure above God. Until we see the ultimate essence of evil and hate it in our own lives and hate it in anything else or everything, we will inevitably, firstly, dumb down the majesty of God. And you say, well, why do I say that? How can you say that? Because the greatness of God's majesty is magnified not by hollow efforts to read the Bible, to not swear, to go to church, to say our prayers and things like that. It's not based on these things. Now, these things are good in not doing those things, and they're very important not to do those things. But they should be the fruit of something. And this is what I'm getting at. I like John Piper's comment here, and I'll read it twice, but it goes like this. And he's very much like this himself, to see that God, affections for God, to love God with our, where God tells us our heart, mind, soul and strength, and to love our neighbours as ourselves. It says here, God's supreme, all-satisfying, infinitely valuable, infinitely beautiful glory will not be magnified in your soul. So I'll read that again. God's supreme, all-satisfying, infinitely valuable, infinitely beautiful glory will not be magnified in your soul until your soul is supremely satisfied in Him. Until your soul is satisfied in God, you will not find true joy, you will not find the sustenance to life, and you will keep on doing those things that you shouldn't be doing. Going back to Miss Lovibond, Miss Lovibond had a profound love for the author of the Bible, of God. And in her was God itself, God, because she never got married, and God was everything to her. And she would pray and pray and pray, and give out and try to tell people about Christ. And she lived for that. And she had a joy, what I saw of her, because I prayed many times with her and that, she had such a joy in her heart. And it didn't mean that she was going around happy and everything all the time, but she had this contentment, this pure contentment with her. And what I think can happen, and to add to this, is sometimes when we see that we go along with life and we just try to keep the commandments, be good and things like that, we can actually separate ourselves. We can be doing these good things without really without God being there. And we can also, when we look at this, we can diminish why Christ came and why he died for us. And I think this is striking, and this is particularly what I can get out of Wilberforce and some of these Puritans and the early church, particularly when we read some of these things, books and statements from them. But what did Christ achieve? Now, these are the things which I generally think of myself. And I've written these down, and it's like forgiveness of sins for his people, the removal of the wrath of God for his people, the defeat of death and the devil, the deliverance from hell and everlasting misery, the resurrection of our body someday, the healing of every physical and mental that we, or disability that we'd have, and the entrance into a new heaven and a new earth. When you think about it, you don't have to be a Christian to really want that. It'd be a fool who says he doesn't want to go into hell, But the thing is, we know that Jesus paid for this, and everyone in him has that. They have that. Forgiveness of sins, the removal of wrath of God, from God, and all that. But this is not the ultimate thing that why Christ died. And this is, marrying up to what I'm saying before. Most Christians would likely say to me and say, how can you say that? Forgiveness of sins, removal of the wrath, God's wrath, defeat of the devil, deliverance from hell, the resurrection of our bodies, inheritance into heaven. But that's not what the ultimate reason why he died. We would say yes to these things, and that was his triumph for those things. We'd say yes, 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 we would say. But none of this is the ultimate triumph of Christ. All of them lead to something more. And this is what Peter says. The Apostle Peter says this. In 1 Peter, he says 3:18, he says, Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God. That he might bring us to God. That's what he wants. All of these other things are obstacles. He wants us to be reconciled to God. He wants us to get over our sins. All these things like that, and forgiveness of sins. What he wants for every one of us. And this is why Christ died. Because what we could say, if I say it a different way, if Christ died, if the gospel, which is about Christ dying for us as sinners, if it only brought forgiveness of sins, if it only brought salvation, if it only brought us escape from hell, if it only brought us eternal life, if it only brought us these things, and it didn't bring us into the enjoyment of the person of God, it would not, and I should stress this, it would not be good news. These things are often talked about in Christian circles. Salvation's there. Get out of hell and all these things. But that's not what Christianity is about. That's not why Christ came. It doesn't matter how many songs we sing in these books. And a lot of the songs we sing, they wouldn't be good news. They wouldn't be good news, no matter how magnificent they are, because it's about Christ getting us to God. He's removing the obstacles in our way so we can stand before God and we can enjoy God forevermore. And I don't know if you ever heard the Westminster Confession. I was looking this up last night, and I've heard it before. But there's about 107 confessions. This is done in about the 1600s. And it was done by the Puritans in about 1600s, and the Presbyterians got together and they had all these questions, confessions of statement of faith. And the first one on there, the question goes like this: what is the chief end of man? So what is the purpose of everybody, really? That's what it's asking. What is the purpose of the person, of each of us? And the answer is to glorify God and to enjoy him forevermore. And they were spot on. To glorify God and to enjoy him forevermore. When we look at, for example, just to nearly finish off here, when we look at the Pharisees, right? The ultimate essence of evil say, oh, they were, treacherous to Jesus, they were doing all these other things, and they were. But what was the essence of evil for them really? It was really the case of they didn't have a love for God. And in Luke it tells us that it says they loved money and they loved the praise of men. So they had exchanged the all-satisfying glory of God for the glory of man and the pleasures that money could buy. So in the end, the essence of evil, to finish off now, is the loss of the taste for God. Whether people have ever had it, whether they've had it for a little while or not have it, they've rejected God. But if they haven't had the taste for God as being the all-satisfying life and joy, and the preference of Him, preference of God Himself above other things. We can go through life unless we have and we ask the Spirit of God to help us to see God as our delight, to see God, to cherish Him to the utmost. In the scriptures, I used to wonder, why did it say things like this? And it said, you must love God more than your mother and your children, well, everything. He says you should even hate them. But he wouldn't talk about hate because He made you for them. He said it would seem like hate the way you should love God. And if we can't see God as our highest treasure and our highest pleasure, we will keep on committing these things. When we look at all the atrocities over the world, we try to scratch our head and say, how could a person like Hitler, how could someone like Idi Amin, how could Pol Pot, how could many of these people do what they do? Well, the first thing is that they've rejected God as their all-satisfying pleasure in their life. They have put other things in His place. And we should be like, how can I say, like they say, you should set our face like flint, or another way of saying that we should be unwavering and hate evil and hate it and the evil in the world, and spend our time growing in that fellowship with God and with what He's done through Christ for us. Because what Christ has done with His blood, He's allowed us, as I said, to go into and to be with God. And we will enjoy Him evermore. Amen. I'll leave it at that. I just pray, just before I go to my seat, I'll just pray for that. Oh, Heavenly Father, I thank You for Your word. And Lord, we struggle sometimes, at the fruit area, we see things in our lives which aren't good. But we know really it's a case of putting these things, these pleasures, which many times are not pleasures at all, and instead of You, and help us to put You in a place. Let You be our all-satisfying joy, Lord. Let us treasure You above all things, and then we will learn to love those around us. We will learn to do the things that You want us to do. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.